Hi, my name is Bob Greenyer, and I'm a volunteer with the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. So welcome this 27th of July 2025, where we'll be talking about O-Day skins, boundary conditions. How is everyone out there in YouTube land? Welcome Artifact, Asturus, Sentient Code, Overwhelmed Games, Ken Pratt, Simeon Hine, Corky Goss is in the house, EBB, Mark Alexander, John Weir, Misunderstood, Luke Threadgold, Ken Pratt, UFO, Michael Stiller. Wow, we have quite a quorum here. Hi, Rhett Oracle. Thank you for joining me this evening. Contraption and Mark Alexander and Athena Mack and Sebastian Sosnowski. Hi, Tammy. Great to have you here. Okay, so I've been kind of toying around with this concept, and I've mentioned it a number of times over the last several years. And I kind of want to delve into my hypothesis as it stands and get your feedback on it, because I think there's another complication to these little structures. So, as you know, I have argued that a toroidal plasma becomes a fractal toroidal plasma, and that has a fractal toroidal moment which has a non-radiating boundary. And I believe that on that non-radiating boundary, the similar toroidal moment-like substructures can bind, and they form a skin. And because they have these wonderful powers endowed upon them, they can consume matter and disassemble it, and potentially they feed it to the beast, as it were. You can imagine a planet like Earth with loads of little humanoids all over it, consuming energy coming from the cosmos and our sun, and plants and all kinds of organisms living on the surface of the Earth, which is the non-radiating boundary. And these organisms, the life, is breaking down this energy into other things and depositing it on the Mother Earth. So that kind of thing. So, and I have a lot to say, and I don't know whether I'm going to get through much of it today. So there'll probably be a Skins 2 and a Skins 3. And I would like your feedback in between those as we move forward, as I said at the beginning. So what are we looking at here on the first slide? You can see I've got a scale of 5 microns over here. And what you're going to see on the next slide is not fully cleaned up images from the Matsumoto archive, which are going to be replacing some of those in the current book. And it's actually from this particular mark. Okay? And what that is, according to Matsumoto, is a rotating ring that has come through a nuclear emulsion, and it is then going through a space in between nuclear emulsions into another nuclear emulsion, and it apparently stops 50% in. And the suggestion is that this is rotating as it is moving along. Well, maybe, if we are to think of it as a very thin ring. And what we've got here on the top right here is an acrylate plate. Here. Down here we have another acrylate plate, or acrylite plate. Then there's this nuclear emulsion, and this nuclear emulsion, and then a unknown space between them. Now, ordinarily, the nuclear emulsions might be packaged such that this space would be comprised of something else, but it's at least comprised of air. Now, over here, we've got a diagram that is associated with the experiments that produce these types of marks, over here on the left. And you can see the acrylite plate is 1 millimeter here in thickness. So you've got 1 millimeter, 1 millimeter, 1 millimeter, 1 millimeter, 1 millimeter of acrylate plate. And then he's saying that the nuclear emulsion layer is about 100 microns. 100 microns. Okay? And can you see what I'm showing you here, by the way? And is the sound good? I should have asked that earlier, otherwise I'm just talking to myself. Let me know. Hi Farsted. Hi Paul Keane and Music. Hi GPs. Okay, 5 times 5 from Corky. Excellent. Right, so the experiment would be over here on left, and in this case it would be above here on the top. Thank you very much. Excellent. Good sound and visuals. Okay, excellent. Right. So these are double-sided nuclear emulsions. Okay, and we can presume that they are, and I can tell you they are, they're about an inch by an inch. Is that right? 2 inches by 2 inches, I think, because he's saying down here it's events per 16.8 centimeters squared. So one can imagine that's a little over 4 centimeters by 4 centimeters. So let's argue it to be 4 by 4 centimeters, 16 centimeters squared. So on the first emulsion, there was absolutely 0 marks. As we went through the first emulsion to the second emulsion, we had the most marks per 16.8 centimeters squared. That is to say, something like 28 to 29 marks on that second emulsion layer. So whatever these were, they had to go through the acrylate plate and the nuclear emulsion before they were in a state where they could deposit themselves. Okay? And then on the next one, there was a reduced amount, looks like 19 per 16.8 centimeters squared. Then it goes through another acrylate plate, and then we see a measly, how should we put this, on the inner side of that, we've got 3, maybe, 0 on the fourth, and then it has to go through another acrylate plate before we get excited, and it drops down, and then there's nothing here, nothing here. So it looks like going through the acrylate plate excites neutral clusters into a state where they will interact with the nuclear emulsion. So maybe it's an impedance change, as Ken Shoulders would say. Okay. Now, at this point, I think it's probably appropriate to go and dig up Ken Shoulders' patent because it's very relevant to what I'm going to be talking about today. So let me just see if I can find that. That would be useful if I'd have dug that up earlier, but I didn't. So there we go. Da-de-da-de-da. So the drawing in question is Fig 60. And if we break that out, we can see it here. And the one that we are interested in here is this one, which is the basic Evo, not a bead chain of Evos, Fig 61. It's a individual Evo, although it might be interesting to note that the inter-Evo distance is approximately but not exactly equal to the overall Evo non-radiating boundary. So we established that the wording wasn't very clear in his patent, but this 801 is effectively a non-radiating boundary in the kind of skewed terminology that is being used in the patent wording. In here, 800, this is this core, and he goes into some description about that. Hi, Malcolm Bendel from India, from Alcohol is in the room. So if you can imagine, if we come out, that this darker area in here is where the main action is occurring, and there's this boundary here, then what you see here on the Evo, the basic EV, is slightly larger than the gap between them, But if you consider this inner core, then it would be slightly bigger than the gap in between them. Okay. Now, what he said about this is around 1 micron in size. And I have found that an EVO of less than or around about 700 nanometers is capable, if it's an electron quark gluon plasma, to produce the magnetic field to cause baryon color disconfinement into quarks. Therefore, it can self-sustain. These things do appear to self-sustain, and we're going to see at least one example in this video, maybe another one. And I believe that's what's going on in the core. And that's why they need to be specifically around this micron scale. Okay, with that in mind, we are going to look at some of the evidence. So, whilst Takaaki Matsumoto assumed that this was a ring because he saw a ring, I am minded to think it's actually the non-radiating boundary. So what we're going to do is we're going to zoom into this. One thing to note, actually, the scale here is 50 microns. So this is about 50 microns. It's a little bit bigger than 50 microns, which means that given the fact that the nuclear emulsion is 100 microns thick, this structure can sit completely within the nuclear emulsion. But he draws it here as being on the surface of this 100 micron nuclear emulsion layer. So it comes down and it locks 50% in according to his diagram, and I would agree with that because of the electrostatics and magnetohydrodynamics. Okay, so I'm going to zoom into this top area here because I believe it tells us some of the most interesting data. Okay, so here we go. And we have this end of the trail here, okay? The end of the trail here. And then we have this almost kind of like spherical object here. And he's assuming that this structure is rotating and it's a ring. I think it's a little bit more interesting than that. I actually think it is a spherical boundary. And I think the spherical boundary has a thickness. That is to say, it has a double boundary, the inner boundary and the outer boundary, defined by this kind of shape here. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to zoom into this. And by the power of photoemulsions, which have the resolution essentially down to the grain of the photoemulsion, we can zoom in to extremely high levels in a way that was not even possible by Takaaki Matsumoto when he was doing this work in the 1990s. Okay, so here we do. I've zoomed into that head. This is 50 microns, you can see up here. And now I'm zooming into this area here and pulling out this frame. And this is our 5 micron overlay here. If we go in even further, we can see that this is our double boundary here, okay? And that this is in the body of that spherical section, as I call it. Now, on the next frame, I'm just gonna show this scale where each black and white and black and white and black, they are representing 1 micron. Okay, so here we have it. What we can see is typically the black spot, is like this black spot here, is 1 micron. Now, the way a microscope will often work with a mark is that when it comes out of focus, the mark will represent as a ring. This may be a ring, I'm not sure it is, based on other images that I've seen from Matsumoto where the particle beam is coming out of or into the nuclear emulsion. When it comes out of the plane of focus, it actually presents as a torus, but it's not actually a torus. Okay, so please hold that in mind when we are looking at what we are looking at here. So this, in my view, is perfectly in the plane of focus. Okay? These ones here are not perfectly in the plane of focus, so they will not necessarily be perfectly scaled. So looking at this one here, I would argue that that is pretty darn near to 1 micron. I would also argue, if you look down here, this one looks like it's in the plane of focus pretty much, this one too, this one not so much. But what I can say is this one, and this one are mostly about a micron, and the gap in between is a little bit less than a micron. And this pattern repeats itself all over. So let's say if this is a micron, this is a micron, the gaps in between, if we're calling the white a gap, then the whites are less than a micron. And this is completely compliant with what was claimed by Ken Shoulders. So the question is this boundary layer made up of smaller substructures? And I would argue it is. And the smaller substructures are making stable clusters which have their cones, their vortex cones, going into the apple, at least, the apple or at least the non-radiating boundary of the substructure, which would effectively limit the the minimum size that this can be. And given the fact that we've got like 1, 2, 3 here, this might be, I would say, a 4-order structure. This might be a 5 or a 6-order structure. I think anything from a 4-order structure or up would form a good non-radiating boundary, or what one might call a double boundary, or what one might call a double layer, or the core function part of a double layer. Okay, so if I step forward again, I've zoomed in even further here, and again here, this one here, I'm pretty sure that's perfectly in the plane of focus, and it's almost spot on for 1 micron. Again, in the plane of focus, I think this is a micron, this is a micron, and the gap, it looks pretty much like a micron, but given the fact that this is slightly shaded, I think the gap is, as was described by Ken Shoulders, slightly smaller than the main structure. This is slightly out of the plane of focus, but not bad. Now, if I go back, I've described this before, that this, in my view, is like a Fresnel effect. And what I believe is happening here, because if we go up here, if we had a static surface, that is to say, if this is a sphere, right? If you can imagine, it's not a ring, but it is actually a sphere. And it's not a static sphere with things in fixed positions. They're boiling. They're like moving all over again and reorganizing themselves constantly. That as this moves through here, if they were static, you would see linear trails going along here. These would all be linear trails. But if they are boiling and rotating, if you can imagine, this whole surface here is kind of like boiling and rotating. It's a very dynamic structure, and only when it's going in a particular direction, that is either when, if we step forward, when the tornado is the main tornado, that is to say, when the main tornado is pointing directly into or out of the emulsion, do you get a ring? And when it's pointing along the emulsion or slightly off in line with the emulsion surface, do you get a line? Okay? And so I think what's happening is these structures are kind of spinning around and reorganizing themselves all of the time. And it's so quick that even if this was traveling along the surface at a very, very high rate of speed, it would only be exposing the bits of the film as it swept through its plane of the actual surface. Okay, and effectively you're looking at the interaction of the bit that bleeds out of the N-level Tor. You're not looking at the substructures themselves. You're looking at the bit that bleeds out of the N-level Tor, the actual main principal vortex cone. Okay, so for those that are not sure what I'm talking about, I have my trusty props here. All right, so this would be our big cone here, and it would be this cone. So either when it's going along the surface like that or slightly into or out of the surface is when you're looking at it. In fact, I've got some smaller ones here so we can get them in frame. Right, so you're looking at that bit, okay? Either there or when it's kind of like there. But when it's there, you probably don't see it because it forces itself through a wormhole. So when it's pointing forward, it's got a wormhole going into the plane of view, right? When it's going like that, you start to see it. When it's going like that, you see it along the surface. And when it's like that, you see it because it's yanking electrons in through there. Okay? So that way you do not see it. That way you do not see it. That way you do not see it. None of these ways do you see it. It's when you come round to this end and you see the bit coming out of the overall non-radiating boundary. You start to see it, and then you start to see it down here. Okay? Hopefully that's clear. If it's not clear, let me know and I'll try and do some other visuals. Okay. So that means that you can actually have areas where there is complete white. Complete white, because it's not interacting with the emulsion in a way that exposes it. Okay? But you can also get lines, and the lines tend to be conical or tapered a little bit, or slightly fuzzy. So you have a dark head and a little trail. Okay? Now, this is very, very supportive of the observations of Ken Shoulders. Again, around about a micron to the non-radiating boundary, a central core. And then you have structures that can join together with a gap in between. Okay? Now, I've got a whole series of data. I could have chosen hundreds and hundreds of examples, but I just want to show you a number here. This is the first time we saw a fractal Tor in Henk Uren's experiment. I have here a 1 micron scale, and you can see that the section of one of these subsections out on this broken area here where the loops come off is within the margin of error of the central part of an EVO. Okay? The field structure in between. So if you can imagine, these would be condensed matter, coherent matter rather, with a gap in between. And when the overall structure collapses, the coherent matter forms a crystal that fills in the intervening space. You can imagine the coherent matter would be in the core here and then spread out. On this one, which is by Nesterovich, it also has this boundary layer. Okay, there's the magnetohydrodynamic structure as identified. This is an impact mark of a long-lived plasmoid. This is from Bogdanovich et al. At the Moscow Nuclear Physics Institute. And here is the double boundary, and it turns out that it is within the margin of error of around about 1 micron. And it gets a bit fatter over here, it's a little bit fatter over here, and in certain places it's a little bit thinner here. Okay? So the actual layer in this case is very, very consistent. It's not fuzzy. And this is one that was created from water flow plasma discharge. Now, I'd like you to note this shape. When I was talking about this in a previous presentation, I said I wasn't sure which way up it goes, but it goes one or the other way up, right? But that being said, I would like you to look at the 10 yen versus a Marsa gas coin. And note this angle here and this blob up here. We've got very similar things going on with this angle here in this structure on the macro structure, and the kind of like inverse of that on the boundary layer, which is it's over here. Okay, with our breaker and our maker, our breaker and our maker. And we looked into our maker structure here, and we saw these, what I called cobblestones at the time. Okay, and zooming into the cobblestones, we have these little balls going around, which appeared to be eating the copper oxide, the oxygen from the copper. And so you can see it here. It's, look at 102, 104. So 102 here has some sulfur. 104 has some sulfur. The oxygen here is 14.4, and this one's 8.51. Whereas in this one here, 99, the oxygen down here, we've got a lot more copper there in that particular sample there, and by atomic concentration. Okay, so I argued that a typical reaction attributed to ball lightning was going on here, and these are probably long-lived plasmoids that after the initial few seconds of experimentation had concluded this structure was a substructure of this one, and on this side there was another substructure, and it had many little micro ball lightnings moving around, and these might have operated probably, given what we know now, for around about 2 days. So I would love to do this experiment again, see if we can achieve something similar, and put it under the SEM immediately, and over a number of days see if we could see these things moving around. Okay, so just to check the scale of these things, I have got this image, but with the scale here. This is 100 microns, and this is the cobblestone here, this one here, which we focused on in snowballs on cobblestones, and you can see that this is 20 microns. So on the basis that this is 20 microns, this is 1 micron in scale. Okay, and you can see that these are within 1 micron. This is sort of like the internal volume. Now, where does the action occur in our fractal toroidal magnetohydrodynamic structures? Well, it occurs in the core. So what we're looking at here possibly is there is a electrodynamic structure, a ball lightning, and what you're seeing is the transmutation that occurred in the core. So that would be in the sort of diagram of Ken's shoulders. The core would be this part, which I would argue is approximately equal to the apple. And we certainly know from the various experiments with Binju and Huang that inside the apple is where the transmutation occurs. And so if this is 1 micron, this would be less than 1 micron. So it stands to reason that the action here would be in a volume less than a micron. And we're going to see more evidence of that moving on. Now, this incredible set of images in the Bogdanovich video recordings of long-lived plasmoids here shows a plasmoid that is interacting with a dielectric surface. So what do I mean by a dielectric surface? Well, I mean something like this acrylite plate. Okay? So it's not surprising there's some sort of interaction going on here. And this is a tornado that's reaching down. Reaching down. And unbelievably, this is just like Ken Shoulders said. You've got 2 structures in the core here, and this is a helical beam coming up through the center here. Okay, it's a little unclear here. So this is Bogdanovich et al. And I would argue that possibly this is coming out of the apple or the This is the non-radiating boundary, one of the two. In this case, where a ball lightning hit fused quartz, which is a dielectric barrier, in the work of Henk Urian, Vega experiment, you see the classic sort of angle of the vortex going into the top and then coming out of the bottom for the counter vortex, just as it is on the 1930s shaped structure vortex anti-vortex on the Nikola Tesla weapon to end all wars structure that he had in the background of that photo. And it has this vortical beam coming down here, and it's the same orientation. So the vortex is coming that way, that way, that way, that way, and again it's coming that way, that way, that way, that way, with the head up here. Okay? Kind of makes sense when you look at the orientation of the magnetohydrodynamics inside, and this would have been traveling in this direction. Okay. Now, when we are referring to the structure having a skin like this is what I'm calling the skin. I'm calling this area here the skin, the boundary, the non-radiating boundary. Here, this is the non-radiating boundary. This is where the electromagnetics fight themselves to a draw, according to one Tom Bearden. And so no electromagnetics comes out here. It's just scalar and vector potential. So this is where you would imagine that things that are able to see the toroidal moments in there and have their own toroidal moments would be attracted to it, but get stuck on this particular boundary. It's kind of like a standing wave node. It's like the ultimate standing wave node. It's where full cancellation of the electromagnetics. So a scalar wave, according to Tom Bearden, is when you have two electromagnetic waves 180 degrees out of phase, so that they have nodes on which there is effectively full cancellation of the electromagnetics. In this case, the way the fractal toroidal moment works is it has this non-radiating boundary where all of the electromagnetics cancel and they don't emerge outside. They come to a dead stop. So this is like a super node. It is like the last node. Okay? So that is what I believe is creating this boundary here. The super node. Right? And I think we'll look at the Nesterovich paper and the Bogdanovich paper now, because I think it's the right time to do it. So we will go here. Because I think what we're going to see here is, I mentioned this before in passing, and I've talked about it before, but I think you're going to understand that, in my view, what you have on this boundary here is quite flexible. It's quite flexible. Now, it will tend to want to be a sphere. Okay? But what do we know can distort these structures? What do we know that can distort these structures? Well, we do know that in the Cooley patent application that was classified in 1995, they were using the same approach as Ken Shoulders suggested in 2004, and that was in the patent of Kirill Chukhanov. That is to have a dielectric. And you have a dielectric, and the dielectric gets charged, according to Ken Shoulders and Chukhanov, such that electrons are repelling the boundary of the ball lightning in the Chukhanov patent, in the Cooley, in the Ken Shoulders suggested work. In the work of Paul Collop, his patent from 1973, where he is creating a kind of ball lightning structure, he uses pressure. And if you can imagine, pressure will, be buffeting it around, then it's able to interact. So the skin is able to interact on this boundary, I believe, because it has these substructures on the boundary. And in fact, Chukhanov said you can get a rod. I would argue it's probably a dielectric rod, and you could push it in and you could literally deform it and it would go round the rod. It would go round the rod. So what I'm saying is that these things, ideally, if they don't have a charged surface, they will tend to a sphere if the impedance of the material is all the same. So if it's on a piece of metal, you'll have a hemisphere. Okay? If it's on inside the nuclear emulsion, it will be a sphere, the non-radiating boundary. Now, we've looked inside the non-radiating boundary, and we've seen a torus in there, and/or we've seen the substructures in various things that I've shared over the years. But if it's the same impedance material, in my view, it will create a sphere. It will tend to a sphere, okay? Because of something that's inside. Because of something that is inside. What is the thing that's inside? It is what is referred to here by Bogdanovich as the body. The separation of the plasmoid part from its body. Okay? An object of weaker luminescence is visible on the other side of the plate, lower right. Okay? So here, this is the bit that excites the air around it. And this here is a dielectric plate. One can assume from the scale here, this is probably around about 1 millimeter. And the interesting thing is that it's keeping this distance. So what's happening here is it's charging the plate here. And this is obviously charged in some faint way or other. And it's distorting the skin. It's distorting the skin, which is entirely separate from the thing that I believe created it. The actual fractal toroidal electrodynamic structure here has come out through its own non-radiating boundary, leaving, and this probably has a non-radiating boundary around it still, but it left behind its non-radiating boundary. Now, I have argued, but it wasn't very clear, maybe in the past, that these structures can rebuild a skin. And in this way, this is how a ball lightning could travel through a window and or another material, because the core itself is neutral. The core itself is neutral. Okay? The outside is charged. And so this could be left behind and die, dissipate, because it doesn't have the thing that maintains it. It could fall into other substructures because they are self-similar. And this could rebuild a structure. Okay? For those that are not aware, this again, look at this. This is 50 microns, which is about the same size as that shown by Matsumoto. But Matsumoto is showing the skin. This is the actual core. Okay? This lasted for 2 days. So this is the water flow plasma discharge system producing black EVOs and luminous EVOs and so forth. But for me, this image here is absolutely mind-blowing. It shows that it is not a simple thing. There is a core structure. This is the fractal toroidal electrodynamic structure. This is kind of that red wheel within wheel within wheel structure. This can synthesize because it is able to, in my view, create electron, gas, quark, gluon plasma. And it can potentially spit some of these structures out, and or they come from other ones that are falling apart. And they come out through the structure and they form a skin around it at the non-radiating boundary. But this one, it's wanted to carry on through this piece of glass, this dielectric barrier, and it's left the glowy part behind. Left the glowy part behind. Okay. So we will go back to our presentation. So this would be the skin. This would be the bit that glows in the video images of Matsumoto. But the actual active core is neutral, and it doesn't leave a trail. It doesn't interact in the way that the skin does, the boundary layer. This is clearly interacting with the plate into which it's attached. And what is that plate? Well, we need to go to Nestorovich's paper here. And just to tie into the birdie presentations, these are the birdies that were observed by Bogdanovich et al., of which Nestorovich was one of the teams. Here's a film showing some birdie marks. Not very perfect ones, but they're all the same from plasma flow, plasma discharge flow. Okay. So here's this mark here. And the thing is imprint having the shape of butterfly wings on a dielectric plate. On a dielectric plate. Okay? So this is the same kind of thing. Now, you could imagine, okay, that you could have a scenario where what actually happens is there's some kind of attraction back here. And if this was the thing leaving the mark on the nuclear emulsion and the neutral part went straight through, if it came back through and grabbed its structure again and lifted it up, it might be doing what was suggested by Matsumoto, and that is jumping up and down between the plates. So what you can imagine is it comes through this first plate, and as it's trying to come through here, it's already got excited. The plasmoid itself gets stuck, and the body goes on, and then it kind of comes back up and drags it around. So it might actually be the body, the fractal toroidal electrodynamic structure that's in the center, that goes through and then comes back up, goes through and comes back up. And that might be actually what's going on. So if you combine these understanding, then yeah, pretty interesting. So looking at this particular scale, there does seem to be a little bit of variability. I mean, not everything is perfectly 1 micron, clearly, and I think we can understand why in a little while. So where do we see this in nature? Well, this is the Hessdalen soil sample that was taken where they had observed a ball lightning in 2002 colliding with the ground. They took a soil sample from where it collided with the ground, and they found this iron-rich crenellated microsphere in the impact site. It has, very helpfully, a scale here, 10 microns, and you can see this is 1 micron. And you can see that roughly the structures that are the crenellations are around about 1 micron, but they filled out. So you can imagine how this is. It's kind of like you've got the area in which the material is being pulled in here, okay? And when it gets spat out, it always comes out through the same tornado, okay? Goes in through the tornado and it comes out through the tornado. And I believe what happens is it will then fill in the gap largely between the two structures when the structure dies. Okay? And there's a lot of evidence to suggest this is what's going on. Again, over here, these so-called 2.7 billion year old micrometeorites found in, Australia. From the scale down here, which is very helpfully 1 micron, I've put it over here. Again, the substructures are largely of the order of 1 micron. Okay. So next one, we can see this looks like a broken shell, and it has this fully homogenized iron-rich layer, this amorphous layer with these crenellations on the outside, which are longer. And we found out from Bingyuan Huang, in his case, that it was a golden ratio between the homogenized layer and the crenellations that were on the outside of his structures. Okay. Again, over here, this is a 10 micron scale down the bottom right, and these are all essentially 1 micron. Just like you see in the structures here of Matsumoto, you see some directly pointing up things, and some lines and some directly pointing up ones. Okay, and I think that allows for these kind of structures where some are like 1 micron just on their own, pointing up, and one there, one there, one there, one there. And some of them are more blended together because maybe they weren't directly pointing out. But they tend to point out. And I believe the core of the structure is essentially all stuck together, pretty much. And that lends itself to form this fully homogenized layer. More examples. Here is an example, again in Henk Uren's ball lightning experiments. There were many like this in the 500-hour, 400 kVA generator of Malcolm Bendel. And we also noted in these experiments that unless you have a structure that's at least 3 microns across, you do not see any crenellations. And I think that fits very nicely with what we are seeing here, that you kind of need 3 or 4 across. And if you can imagine you had 3 across or 3 widths, that would at least allow for a 4-order structure, 4 subtor structure, where it starts to become stable. And I believe that all of the structures in the boundary layer pretty much have to be at least 4 orders in there. And we're going to see some evidence for that. Okay. So yes, again, 30 microns. This is 10 microns. You can imagine that these are around about 1 micron. Here on this other one from the Henk Uren work, this is 1 micron. You can see that these are of the order of 1 micron or within the boundary as set by Ken Shoulders. These are the areas taken out from inside a crystal grain boundary in palladium, deuterated palladium, 10 micron scale over here. And you can see they're obviously growing, they're joining together, consuming. Here's another spherical structure taken out of a diamond in Neil Crichton Gold's Lion experiment, Line 2 I think this was from 2017. You can see here 10 micron scale. Now, whilst this is a lot larger than 10 microns, and this would be where the material is chucked out or pulled in. So this is obviously a heavier element because carbon is darker. The way this is a secondary electron beam here. This is either being pulled in or spat out from the vortex, coming out or in. I suspect it's going out. What you can see is loads of little hemispheres in here that are cut into the surface, and the majority of them are of the order of about 1 micron. I did not notice this until today. So we got these little cells, little cells, little cells, little cells, little cells of around about the order of a micron. I need to go back to the mining diamonds with Lion to see if the little spheres that are consuming the diamond are also around about a micron or less. I suspect they probably are. This is not scale, but this is from John Hutchison's sample. Spherical sections taken out from inside a piece of steel. So this is holy steel, consuming the metal. Here are some more of the structures from Henk Uren, my analysis of the Vega Valley. Here is a torus. And you can see the width of this structure, which in this case, I believe it's made of 2 in the subtor. So it's got something like 15 subtors, and then the subtor itself has sub-subtors, 2 of. They are almost exactly 1 micron wide. Okay. Over here, this is 10 microns, so this would be 2.5 microns, so this would be about a micron. This has 32 subdivisions, I thought 36, I think 36, something like that. This one here is the actual substructures here are around about a micron. Okay, but you get the idea. Now, where this becomes very, very interesting is on another clear boundary layer, a non-radiating boundary. And that was of the 15mm section taken out of this copper pipe in a different Henk Uren experiment, in a Vega experiment. And we found that on the boundary of this, we had substructures on just a few millimeters outside the cutter, or a few microns rather, just outside the boundary layer. So this might be a little bit of the fuzziness that goes on outside. So the fuzziness that we are talking about is this kind of fuzziness here, this kind of fuzziness, yeah, this kind of fuzziness. So these might be substructures that this is the cut layer here on the inside, but there's a little bit of fuzziness going on within a micron or 2 outside of that. So we'll go back to that. And we found 2 order structures, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 8. I'm going to look at a couple of these. This is a 2 order structure. We can actually see I've helpfully got the scale down here as a micron. This is a micron. So in this case, the actual core here clearly is a little bit less than a micron. Okay? And you can imagine that the subcore here and the subcore here would be smaller than that also. So we can see that the thing that does the magic in the core, at least in this experiment, could account for some of these sub-micron long-lived plasmoids consuming this material on the 10 yen coin treated by Amasa gas. If we go to the next one here, this on the 3 order structure is almost exactly, yes, we've got the paisley, the vortex coming in, but the core, as best as can be resolved with this microscope, is around about 1 micron. So the core is about a micron. So the hypothesis potentially that the area which does the work here is actually at the core of the overall plasmoid magnetohydrodynamic structure. This could be what that is you're actually seeing there. Okay, so this is about a micron. It also turns out that on a 4 order structure, it is apparently around about a micron. We can't see on this 6 order structure because it's filled into part degree and it's set at an angle. But if we go to the next level here, we can see, the next slide rather, we can actually see that it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 microns roughly across. And in the next one where this is an 8 order structure, we can see it has substructures coming in here in the inner part of it. And this is around about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is almost 6 microns across this structure. And this does remind me of the book that I have lent to Henk Uren many, many moons ago that showed as these structures scale up, they don't scale quite as you would imagine in their diameter. But if you go and look at my Sochi 2018 presentation, you can see the reference to that particular book from, I think it was work done at Bell Labs from 1938, I think, on discharges from cathode. They called them cathode spots. So here we go. This is the actual cut layer. So these images came from a few microns outside in the fuzzy zone on the other side of the non-radiating boundary. And this is the actual inside cut layer. And it's quite spectacular because those that know about copper's thermal conductivity, it's like pretty much the second most thermally conductive material known to man. And here we are, it's cut in scallops. Now, if you could imagine a load of spheres that are there, all higgledy-piggledy arranged, potentially boiling and rotating around, they're fairly closely packed, but they're all in different orientations. So here is a overview of the cut layer. This is not a melted piece of metal. It's not a melted piece of metal in the traditional sense. It has scalloped sections out. And by the way, we see these same scalloped sections on the iron knee structure from John Hutchison. I've showed that before. You also see it on a window frame that I took an image of in the Imperial War Museum in London. A window from the event. Okay, so here we go. Scallop sections taken out here. Scallop sections taken out. And then these churned areas. And I'm going to zoom in. Oh, sorry, I've gone to the wrong frame there. Where's my zoom in? I've got that one. It needs to be out of sync. It's out of sync. Okay, right. Okay. So I'm going to zoom in. So we're going to look at this area here where I've got the mouse pointed there, this area here. And we're zooming in, okay? And you can see that this is pointing straight at us, and it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, some probably 8 there. And what do we see from the 8 structure earlier? It was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 across, okay? So we go back here. So that's 1.5 microns there. That's not far off 6, I would imagine, across there. And this one is pointing at a different angle. This one's pointing to us. This one's pointing at a different angle. This one is literally like a hexagon, and you can see the arms coming off. This is the vortex is going around in this direction with this one. It's not so clear here. I've got another zoom in level here. There we go. So you can really see that this has a hole in the center here, which is submicron. And then it has spiral arms coming off here. And this is, I would argue, a 6-order structure, very stable core. And the core is not the boundary. So if you go back out, that's the 6-order structure. The boundary is coming over here. Okay. And then the next one is here. The next one is over there. So this is the equivalent of this part in the work of Bogdanovich et al. This part here is doing the magic in the core. This is the bit boundary which everything disappears. This is the core, this is the boundary. Okay, so this is the core, it's this bit here, right? That's the effect. It churns up. In the core, it's churning up. What is it doing? It's literally disintegrating the atoms and converting them, in my view, into an electron, quark, gluon, plasma. Okay? And that is the bit that, because quark, gluon, plasma is the most superfluid thing known to mainstream science that has ever been discovered, it can maintain the magnetic field to self-sustain for, it would appear, without further stimulation for 2 days, typically around about 2 days. So this is churning away, and over a period of time, I believe it would convert the material into quark, gluon, plasma. But the reality is it does it so fast, and it just grabs this whole chunk of metal, and probably it gets collapsed into the core and or partially melted, really melted, not fake melted, and it disappears. It just, this section, cross section, disappears. It's a hemisphere actually, in a complex section cut out of this copper pipe. Okay, instantaneously. And it's non-thermal matter collapse. It's, in my view, because the copper has 63 and 65, both spin nuclei, it's highly susceptible to this process. And so it gets pulled in very, very regularly, readily, because of its magnetic, sort of its electrical component, but then because of it, the nuclear spin. Okay. All right. And yeah, so that essentially is what I believe is going on here. And this, in my view, is a near perfect proof that the boundary of these things, it has a hard boundary, and then just outside that boundary, it has a fuzzy boundary. Now, actually, in this same sample by Henk Uren, we had this mark up here, and I believe this hexagonal structure, because it's hexagonal out here and it's iron on this outside section here, and then this is copper skin, perfectly thin copper skin with a perfect homogeneous iron skin on this side here. You're going to see it in a minute. But what it does is this perfectly homogeneous skin has these braided beams coming out, particularly from this section over here in a line. Okay. How big are they? Well, firstly, you can see here, the internals of this are copper, but it's vanishingly thin. It's almost like I would consider this as superconducting toroid of copper. Okay. And then directly outside of that superconducting toroid of copper, which is the non-radiating boundary of this particular structure, of its substructure, you have this iron material here. And then the iron is spanning out from there. Okay? And so this would be like the fuzzy tendrils coming out. In a separate experiment, and in this experiment we can see here, these tendrils are about 1 micron. These tendrils are about 1 micron, separated by a smaller gap. Separated by a smaller gap. This is in a 90-second ultra experiment. Now, you might not think that's a very long experiment, but the frequency of the ultra experiment is 43,000 hertz, 43 kilohertz. That means in 1 second, it does 43,000 full forward and back pulsations, rarefaction pulses into the water. When two rarefaction pulses collide, they will create a vortex soliton. The vortex solitons will aggregate at nodes, around the nodes, and they start to do the magic. 90 seconds, therefore, is something like 4 million full cycles or 8 million forward and backward half cycles. So 90 seconds is quite a lot of operations. And analyzing this sample, we saw this twisted braid interacting with the raw aluminum. And here again, this is a 1 micron, based on the scale here. This is 1 micron, and it looks like this is almost equivalent scales here between the plasma experiment of Henk Uren Vega and the experiment of Ultra that I conducted in Prague on the 14th of April 2022 at 4:05. So I had enough time to get this done, dry out the aluminium, put it under the SEM, and get this image after lunch. The image I got. But again, we see this instantaneous. And look, as this structure, which is a macro structure, which has at least 2 substructures. So the 2 substructures has substructures within it. And I would argue probably around about 4 to 6. And each of the 4 to 6 substructures has a minimum of 2 structures in there. So we have 2 wheels within maybe 4 to 6 wheels, making 2 wheels at the top level. Okay, it could just be a wheel within a wheel within a wheel, structure. And as this is traveling in this direction, it is leaving this disturbed aluminium, which is instantaneously disturbed. Okay. I don't know if you can see the video, but it's saying I've got an issue with video data. I don't know why that is. Okay, I'm going to be recording locally, so if anyone can let me know. Yeah, it's buffering. Let me just see if there's an issue here. Should be okay. Okay, 5 by 5, Joe Vellecci. Okay. All right. So in the next slide, I've got another area of the same 90-second ultra experiment. And again, look, this is 1 micron up here, and it's leaving these twisted braids of aluminium 1 micron wide. Okay. So, like I say, I have got a huge amount to talk about here. And I just want to go over a few notes, which I'll talk about in more detail in future experiments or future discussion on this. 1. Leonid Aritsyev created with exploding foil in water, exploding titanium foil, a large ball lightning above the reactor. That ball lightning in a few milliseconds split into microball lightning. That tells you that the skin is able to become microball lightning. Okay, 1. 2. The Canadian recent ball lightning structure, nice and big, probably one of the best video sequences of ball lightning. Please, no one send me the fake one done by the Scandinavian of the so-called ball lightning crossing across the railway tracks, or the other one in a car park. Just don't send me those. The one that is recently recorded in Canada, as it dies, it splits into 3 essentially similar sized structures. I believe those were the subcores that were in there. So you can have microball lightning on the outside boundary. Leonid Aritsyev showed that. And you can have the substructures go back to being small ball lightning. And in every case, the thing that you see last is the most stable version of the thing, right? So the smaller ones, 3 of those can join into a much bigger ball lightning. And we've discussed how that can happen. They persist for a little bit longer. We've seen in Bin-Chuan Huang's experiments that you can have a large structure fail, the inner structures come out, they're still operational, then they fail, and inner structures from the inner structures can come out, and then they die. Okay. So the skin of a macro ball lightning can be micro ball lightnings. The inside fractal tores themselves, if they have, in my view, above a wheel, have at least a wheel within a wheel within a wheel, they can also persist after. Okay. I must show you the tungsten chop shop again for those that don't know what I'm talking about. I will get that up. Because the tungsten chop shop, what happened was you saw this ball lightning appear and it consumes around the tungsten, and then on the loop of the wire 180 degrees oppositely to it around the loop, another ball lightning starts forming, and it gets up energy, and then it basically is the same size as the original one, and it cuts the tungsten instantaneously. And the place it cuts it precisely is on this double layer, this boundary. Okay, and I believe it's because of the microball lightning in there, which is comprised of this quark-gluon plasma, and it is a different phase of matter which is able to literally make other matter fall apart. And we know it does with tungsten. Right. I need to do here. Okay, so where's the tungsten chop shop? Okay. So I've got this playing here. It's very, very quick. I've got it slowed down. So this is 3% speed. Okay, so in this frame here, if I can stop it, you can see that the ball lightning is here, and it's supported by the non-radiating boundary. The wire is cut on that non-radiating boundary, this double there. If I can get a better frame. Here, okay, so yeah, it's gone far past it now. play along. Okay, it's gonna keep going, isn't it? Okay, there we go. This is what I'm referring to over here on the right. You see the sphere of the plasmoid boundary, the outside part of it, and it's cut on there. The wire isn't going through. And we've seen this in other Vega experiments. If I can get it to there. Give me a second. Anyway, I'll put it in the notes, or oh no, maybe it's on here. Ah, yeah, okay. In this case, this was a nickel foil. And unlike most of the sapphire experiments, where you just see the hemisphere, on these wire and foil experiments, we see this full sphere. And if you're lucky, you can see that the wire, the actual foil, nickel foil, actually sits through the double layer. Okay, and this is the boundary of the nickel foil, and it's eaten down to the outer boundary, but the inner boundary is the brighter glowing. So you can imagine that the fuzzy bit is on this outside area here. And on this blog, I show based on, here we go, you can see it here. There we go. So the foil is coming through and penetrates through. And this here, this is the fuzzy area, where you have these micro ball lightnings going around, and this is the inner skin of the non-radiating boundary where the electromagnetic waves are trapped, and it either gets cut here or it gets cut here in these experiments. Okay, research from 2001, Sebastian Popescu and E. Logeneno, and I've shown. You know, they show the double layer here where you've got positive charged ions in the middle according to their view, and negative, and there is a fall off between the positive on the inside and the negative on the boundary. That is their view. I think it's more interesting than that. I think that this boundary here is a boiling set of microball lining structures that form the skin. Ethery fuzziness. Yes, I kind of like that phrase. In fact, I have an image here which is from another Vega experiment, and you know, one could argue what the actual fuzzy stuff is made from, but in this case, I think it's very clear. So let me find this for you. This is what I was talking about, the internal structure, where you have two substructures internally. They can wet their skins together, so this is how you form long lines. Yeah. Okay, let me find what I was going to show you. This is one of the many images I've shared of where ball lining has impacted a fused quartz. You can see the structure here that I was showing you earlier. Okay, but all over these samples you see these fuzzy structures, and this is, if I can zoom out, like here, I can show you this one. Some of them is more clear, but again, they're discrete sections, and I will try and image these with something where I can see the scale, and I suspect that these are going to be turning out to be around about 1 micron. So this is where a ball lightning is colliding with the fused quartz. So you've got a hexagonal structure here, truncated triangle with the fuzziness. Here's the fuzziness on a much smaller structure. This one's got a bit of a vortex going into it. It's nice when you see some square ones, always confuses people. Square ball? How's that possible? Yeah. Anyway, there's some better examples on some of the images that I've shared in other versions. But here's this fuzzy boundary. Fuzzy boundary. Okay, so what I am saying, actually, when I am referring to the fact that this non-radiating boundary here is where these things are aggregating, and they are aggregating here. This area is the bit that wets together. So when you look at these images here, and they wet together into like not discrete structures, but it starts to wet together. Yeah. So this is like almost like a tube, but over here you can see some lumpiness. Okay. That's the same thing as when you go from tufts, according to the phraseology of the Sapphire project, Orient Energy. Where is it? These kind of things, which are half spheres, tufts, to double layers, a full wetted boundary. I think what's happening is you've got self-organization of the substructures. They get big enough so that the non-radiating boundary is so big that they start to wet into each other, because it's like a fluid. And I think that then what happens is when you get these things in abundance in your plasma chamber, you have a lot of these substructures moving around, which can get energized. And what happens is you get standing waves, ion acoustic waves in your chamber. And the ion acoustic waves lead to nodes, and it's like cymatics. The cymatics organize the tufts on the spherical surface or inside the outside of the Bendel turbine or Bendel reactor, or on the outside of the inside. So you get these organized, self-organized nodes where you've got the sound waves moving over. And these structures, as I said, can be moved around by, in the case of Tuchanov and Ken Shoulders, to name two, by a dielectric barrier. But in the case of the 1973 patent by Kollock, he used pressure, okay? And to a degree, that is done in the ball lightning patent as well that I shared, the one that was classified by water pressure, sound pressure, okay? So you can use a fluid. In this case, in the 1995 classified paper, it was water pressure and sound to hold it in the middle, like sonofusion. And then in the case of Kollock, they used pressure. Okay, so if that is the case, then if you can move these substructures based on dielectric or pressure gradient or a standing wave, then standing waves would be like cymatics, where these jelly-like spheres can organize themselves into a fuzzy skin. Now, I do believe that they will orient themselves to magnetic and electrical components within the reactor. So, what I believe happened in the Sapphire Langmuir probe incident, where they had a tungsten Langmuir probe and they moved it into a double layer, is the double layer isn't just a voltage gradient, it's full of micro ball lightning. And it just instantly saw that as food. It just saw it as food, consumed it, just as we have done in tungsten-based experiments. So yeah, it's pretty amazing. And so I think standing waves are very, very important to produce these nodal structures. I could show you many, 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 many more examples. This is my hypothesis right now, is that where you have nodes in standing waves, and standing waves can be sound, literally sound, or in electromagnetic standing waves. And typically, you always get a standing wave when you have an impedance change. That is to say, if we are creating a lot of microball lightning in a unenergized state, but the nascent structures, and we're using traveling waves, and we hit a piece of metal, let's say in a Hutchison effect, you immediately get some reflection, and there's automatically a node of some kind at that point. So if the metal is kind of like, you know, round, there's going to be places on that metal where, or spherical, there's going to be places on that metal where it's exactly on the natural node of whatever the wave is that's coming in, if it's not a traveling wave, let's say. So standing waves are critical, whether they are in ion acoustic waves, which are basically standing waves in sound, or in electromagnetic standing waves. These, in my view, can cause the aggregation of these microball lightning. The microball lightning, therefore, can then aggregate into macroball lightning and do a little bit of magic. So if you can imagine, you have these neutral structures moving around, and you've got a crack, like in some of our experiments, in Vega experiments, then these structures can move around and they can get trapped in little cracks, and they can aggregate in that crack until they aggregate into a big structure. And then suddenly there's a lot of free electrons on the surface of the cathode metal, and boom, they become a proper big plasmoid. So that is kind of what I think is going on in this skins and boundary conditions. So if you've got any questions, I'll take them now. Yeah, no crazy tonight. This is just straight up pondering. If you have any questions. Yeah, so shockwave from explosion of the combustion chamber, most important waste energy input, RPM revolutions per minute. TSG is tuned to the firing rate. Okay, yeah, cool. Thank you, Gordon. I will do a quick review, but we're nearly at the end of it, so it's good for your sleep time. Standing wave, ion acoustic waves, electromagnetic standing waves. So Ken Pratt said, could the double layer be microwave spinning pairs? Microwaves are an electromagnetic wave. Yes, it could be a standing wave, but what I see is like cymatics. If you could imagine like your plate and you're putting sound and you put sand on it, the sand grains are like the microball lightning, right? They can be buffeted around by pressure changes, okay? Pressure changes is almost like an impedance change. So they can be moved around, and then when they get close enough, and if they're oriented correctly, they will start to aggregate, and they'll produce a skin. No microwave, MW. Oh, do you mean the strange radiation tracks? I'm not quite sure where you're going there, Ken. Bob, have you tried to contact Ken Shoulder's son yet? No, I haven't, and probably I should. I'm going to be in California soon enough. Yeah, these are what cause strange radiation tracks, the microball lightning and structures thereof. Okay, so I'm going to go and do a quick review. Day skins boundary condition, and what we are looking at there is what Dr. Takaaki Matsumoto observed in a number of stacked double-sided acrylite plates, which were double nuclear emulsions, 100 microns per side. and there was nothing on the first nuclear emulsion. It actually needed to have the structures as they were go through the impedance changes. Okay, got a problem with the data again. I don't know what's going on. Weird. I'm going to keep going because it's recorded locally. He thought that it was a ring, although he drew this circle to show it rotating. I personally believe that it was a boiling structure on the surface of a double layer, what actually is, in my view, a double layer, which is a number of these structures formed into stable structures that are able to occupy the boundary between the electromagnetic contained area inside the non-radiating boundary and the outside. And these things are more stable to a degree than the actual thing that formed them because of what they potentially are internally. And because of the orientation that's going on, that is to say, of the main core that's coming out, which will be the only one that manifests, because when you've got 4 or more, the substructures here that will come out here and down here, let's say in a 2 substructure core, they are not able to penetrate when they have 4. You'll only see the tornado, not when it's like this, because it'll be a wormhole through. Okay. And so I do believe it's a sphere, broiling sphere. Thank you very much, Contraption, for that $20. Very kind of you. So we've zoomed into this little over 50 micron internal structure. Further close up, and we zoom into this close up, and we can see that it definitely has some thickness, this double layer. And just as Ken Shoulders showed us in his patent, which is somewhere here, there is a core area, which he effectively eventually tells us in 2011, I think it is, that it's quark gluon plasma, effectively by sleight of hand. And this is the non-radiating boundary. It does actually refer to that as something like that in the patent, and that these join together where the distance between them is of the order of the scale of the structure that they are, the smaller stable structures are made from. And that is what we actually see in this particular arrangement of materials. A core structure is about a micron, and the gaps between them are a little less. And then we've seen them in collapsed wave functions here, in impacts from Nestorovich and Bogdanovich, where the skin is around about a micron. This is a dielectric plate as well, very important. We looked at it in the 10 yen and a Mars gas, and we worked out that the scale of these things was of the order of a micron or less, which fits the pattern. And that the actual so-called glowing part of the plasmoid itself has a vortex coming out of it when this is interacting with a dielectric barrier. And similar sort of thing here with this fused quartz with the ball lightning, but we're just seeing the mark of the actual structure and its substructures here interacting with fused quartz. Here, this is a natural ball lightning crenellated sphere. This is a meteoritic derived core of ball lightning. Again, around about a micron on the substructures here. This is a MFMP Ultra by my dear friend and colleague Alan Goldwater that has, again, micron scale crenellations on it, and it has this skin here which is homogenized, and it's normally a 1 to 1.618 golden ratio of these parts in these things. And I believe that's because The core is the central core, and these bits coming out are the tornado of the material coming out. So the central core would be 1, and this would be 1.618, the actual amount of material that comes out. Maybe a little further, it depends how much is inside it, but that's what we observe. Again, here on Henk-Uren, I could have chosen a number from Malcolm Bendel's thunderstorm generator as well. This is from disappearance of material inside palladium deuterium, and they can grow and aggregate. Again, reviewing this today, I saw this structure again from late Neil Crichton Gold, his Line 2 experiment core. And there's the 10 micron scale, and there are lots of sections in here that are about 1 micron on the boundary of this spherical section cut out of a diamond. This is cut out of John Hutchison material inside a steel bar. Here, these are collapsed wave function structures from ball lightning in Henk-Uren's Vega experiment, which I analyzed. 15 substructures, something like that, and then 2 substructures, which are about a micron. And then I showed that these things which are just a few microns outside of the cut area here, these would be examples of the fuzzy things that are on the outside of the double layer. So just to confirm what I mean by that, when I'm referring to, is it this one? Yes. This double layer here. So this is the area that gets cut. It's on the inside of that gets cut. Either gets on the inside of there or on here. The fuzzy area is the bit on the outside. It's the fuzziness. So you can actually see the fuzziness on here in this image. You can literally see the fuzziness. So you've got the hard instantaneously gets removed. Oh, sorry about that. I don't quite know what's going on, but we've got a bit of an issue with data today. Okay. So what I was saying is when this ball lightning cut occurs here in Henk-Uren's experiment, you see the hemisphere and then it's gone. So the point at which this got energized, and it's the same with the tungsten. It's the same with all of these things. It gets energized to a certain level and then it instantaneously cuts, and it always cuts on the inside edge of one or other of the so-called double layers. Okay. And if you can imagine, in my view, the bulk of the heads of the structures are towards the inside. Okay, if that makes sense. So that is why that would happen. So yeah, copper should not melt like this. It shouldn't have churned areas, and the churned areas are incredible, all at different angles. And if we zoom in, here's 1 micron. There is a hole less than micron. This is a 6th order structure. We can see there's some vorticity going on. This is being churned. This is facing into the camera. This is being churned. It's facing, along the plane of the image. And that's happening in many cases here, different orientations. And so this is what I'm saying is the reason for why you see that fuzziness on the boundary by Takaaki Matsumoto. And then here you can see where a toroidal structure was left over. And I would imagine this toroidal structure was one of the subtors that was inside the structure that made this sphere. After the hemisphere was cut out of the copper pipe, it migrated over and impacted here and left this iron-rich hexagonal or polygonal structure with this particular boundary and this toroidal structure. And the toroidal structure on the boundary of it had these helical braids, which were iron-rich, and it had a pure iron or iron-rich boundary, which, by the way, is 1 micron. and then it has this imperceptibly thin copper, almost totally copper. In this case, when we're comparing that structure with all these 1 micron features with this 90-second experiment by Ultra, we have clearly 2 substructures coming in here and doing a helical braid. And I think probably there's some at least 2 substructures to the substructures and so forth. Okay. And that is why I think we're seeing this. Same thing over here. This is 1 micron, 1 micron. So I think it's pretty much the same thing going on. So with that, I think that's probably enough because I've got a lot of breaks in this. Sorry about the issues here today. It's been a bit tedious. Film in infrared, you may see what's happening. Okay. Okay, great, Baron Arcanus. Oh, still good. Okay, so some people are having it bad and some people are having it good. Okay. All right. Yes, Corky Girls. Maybe scoop marks in Giza. Maybe. Right. Just want to remind people that I would love to see you at the Tesla Tech in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And if you can't make it, I would recommend that you go to my blog at remoteview.icu and you can get a code there which doesn't give you a discount, but it doesn't cost you anymore, and I'll get $20. And that streaming pass will allow you to look at the videos at any time you like in the future from Tesla Tech. So not only can you see them live, as far as I've been led to believe, you can also see them post-event. So the QR code you need is on the page right now, or it will be. It's this one here. There we go. That one there. Or you can go to bit.ly/tt-25. Okay, and I will be speaking, and I have the deep honor of speaking just after Maury King. And so very, very excited about that. You can see here, this is the schedule for the Saturday there. So I will be speaking after Dr. Thorsten Ludwig. And he is talking about zero-point energy for power and propulsion. Maury King is talking about plasmoids in zero-point energy inventions. And I myself will be speaking about leveraging the wheelwork of, let's call it, coherent energy transformations, which involves plasmatoroids and a zero-point energy. And it gives you both power and propulsion. So we're all very much in sync. Oh, I haven't seen the interview on. Apparently the interview's out on Demystify Sci. So let me go and see that. I haven't seen that's out. So let me go and have a look at that. Those that don't know, I was interviewed, I think it was last week, on Demystify Sci. Let me see. Yes, apparently I'm there, looking a bit kooky, which is as I am. There we go. All right, so it's live on Demystify Sci. 7 hours ago, apparently. I wasn't paying attention. Oops. So thank you for those that have watched that. And that's it. So is there any more questions? Good night, Gary Tucker. Okay. Right. So this was O'Day Skins. Boundary condition. I think this reframes the observations of Dr. Matsumoto It gives us an understanding of a complex aspect of ball lightning. It explains why you get a glowy outside from a substructure inside, how it can cut through things, how, for instance, in electro-discharge machining, you get a spherical cut layer. This is my hypothesis, and I commend it to you and seek your challenging questions. Buenas noches, dobranoc. Good night.